Hello, everyone. It's Jason Rodriguez. Welcome to ETS20. It's been a great show so far. Welcome to the opening panel of the day. Hello, everyone out there. Thanks for joining. Our great guests. First panel of the day, building the bridges of innovation. We're going to touch on the human element being at the center of transformation and change management. So today I'm joined by some great guests. You can see we're having some minor technical difficulties, but we are working on that. We'll go ahead and get started just by having our panelists introduce themselves. But as they get started, I've asked all of them during this time to, when they introduce themselves, also tell us the first place they're going to visit once they feel the pandemic is lifted and it's safe to travel. So I'll first start off with Jeff Bailey.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. I'm Jeff Bailey. I'm a vice president at CGI. I lead our business consulting team in the United States. I'm really excited to be here, and for our colleagues, friends, families on the West Coast and on the Gulf Coast, our thoughts are with you. Please be safe. I think that as soon as this pandemic lifts, I'm going to find the closest cigar bar. I don't care where it is, whether I have to travel, but I think that's where I'm headed.
Josh?
Josh Gould. I lead innovation here at Duquesne Light. The first place I'm going to go, I have a niece who I've never met. She was born in February, and she lives in Seattle. So I've only seen pictures, and that is definitely the first place I'm going to go. Going to meet my new niece. So
awesome. And Frankie?
Hi, I'm Frankie McDermott. I'm the Chief Energy Delivery Officer with SMUD in Sacramento. I've been in that role for about 6.5 years, and it means what it says. I am in charge of power generation, T&D, commercial development, and kind of all the way to the meter. Before that, I was the Chief Customer Officer, and before that, I was running many of the internal services. Where I'm going to go, I have one compromised, grandson that we haven't been able to see. He was born at 4 months early, nearly 10 years ago, so they really keep an eye on him. So he's one of the first people I'm going to go see. And then we're going to go to Mexico because we're dying to go down to a place in Mexico we go every year. So that's my story.
Excellent. And Marty?
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Happy birthday, Zpryme, 7 years old. Thank you for having me. My name is Marty Weymouth. I am the Interim Vice President at CPS Energy, leading from strategy, business planning, execution to value realization ecosystem. Been in the industry 17 years, 12 years at CPS Energy, from all over the company, from leading change management, substation construction, HR, IT, kind of all over the place. In terms of where I would go after COVID, 2 places. The first one is really go to see my mom and give her a hug. I mean, I've seen her 6 feet, but just want to give her a hug, first of all. And the second thing is accompany my husband to go home to Maine and visit his family as well. So looking forward to those good times. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks for talking through that as we enter this conversation. Obviously, we're talking about going to the moon, and there's a lot going on right now between hurricanes, pandemic, there's the economic crisis, there's wildfires. But we decided to kick this conversation off at the center of all this, which all of us on this panel here are deeply involved with the transformation, but also the human development and how we change the industry and our individual companies one by one. And I think we have a distinguished panel to lead this information, not lead this conversation, to talk about how we get there, because we cannot get to the moon or the moonshot of a clean energy transformation without everyone being on the same page and understanding where we're going. So I'll kick this off with Jeff. When it comes to innovation and change management, what are the success traits you're seeing from utilities who have been able to make such a transformation when it comes to change management or innovation?
Thanks, Jason. That's a great question. I think that at a foundational level, innovation we've discovered is always the product of pervasive collaboration. It's about people working with people. So where we've seen successes, and not just with utilities, but particularly with utilities, are clients that understand the difference, for instance, between communication and collaboration. It used to be that you always had a communication plan. We now have a collaboration plan because one is about imparting information The other one is really about working with one another to foster trust and collaboration toward a common goal. So if you understand the difference between communication and collaboration, you're going to do better. Probably the second thing is that complex challenges are always met by human beings. And therefore, the leadership trait is you have to purposely model effective behavior in pervasive collaboration. So for instance, we see that the higher the stakes are with the things that we do, many times human nature is that the more myopic our focus becomes, and we become more insular. It's this notion of like, if I can just take care of what I got to do, everything will be okay. So it's almost counterintuitive to say at the point where you should really be collaborating more, you collaborate less. The other thing is utilities in particular who have done well on this have gotten away from a gotcha culture. Where everybody's waiting just to see where, when you make a mistake and the gotcha culture. And so we try to get away from the notion of, people talk about fail fast. Well, it shouldn't be fail fast so that you can be called out and punished more swiftly. And I think the third and last thing that I would say is really embrace the coexistence of process-based discipline and flexibility, because both are critical, especially with utilities. So for instance, the mental model that keeps, work crews and customers safe isn't the same mental model that fosters innovation. They're not the same, but they're both critical. So you got to kind of learn to live in both of those worlds and have both those worlds coexist gracefully.
Thank you. And turning to you now, Josh, you've been working on this innovation front for a while, both at different organizations. And can you tell us about the critical aspect of having a well-defined single point of contact in decision-making and the successes that come by having that?
Yeah, so I think this is really important for folks outside the industry to understand. This is something we set up here at Duquesne Light. And prior to this, I had a very similar role at Con Edison in New York. And many times our more sort of agile partners will be frustrated at the pace by which utilities move, understandably so. Some of those sort of delays are what I would attribute to kind of good reasons. So safety, legal review, things like that. A lot of them aren't, and we want to target the kind of the not so good reasons for delay. And what you typically find, and Jeff alluded to it when we talked about collaboration, with the new innovation opportunity, it typically doesn't fit in one department. And it typically requires collaboration across department. And so the lines of ownership are not clear. And for that reason, it's also not clear who's going to make the decision on this, right? Who has the kind of decision rights on this? And every opportunity, if you don't sort of establish who's going to make decisions and how we move forward, is a new one. So you're kind of recreating the wheel. And so one of the really important things that that we did both at Con Edison and at Duquesne, that is maybe not seen from the outside, but super important to moving things kind of quickly on the inside, is really clear what you refer to as governance. So decision-making rights, who gets to make decisions on what criteria and all that. And it sounds so like bureaucratic, but I promise you, having been on the inside a couple times, if you establish those things up front really clearly, you're going to be able to move a lot faster and work much more effectively with partners. So I just think that's really important, being clear up front, who makes decisions on what criteria. And in both cases, both at Con Edison and Duquesne Light, we set up what's called an innovation council, which is essentially kind of like an internal Shark Tank. In both cases appointed by the CEO, who said, okay, it's your job, folks in these business units, to make decisions, frankly, at a speed that's faster than the rest of the utility. And that's kind of why we're setting up this decision-making body. So I know governance isn't sexy. It's not the kind of cool whiz bang to the moon, but I will say it's really important from a kind of nuts and bolts. And ultimately, it's one of the things that helps you move faster. So just, something not to overlook.
Thank you. And Frankie, you guys have been well known for some of the accomplishments in the culture and the company that SMUD has become, but it has been a journey. What were some of those key steps taken early, and maybe explain a little how some of this has come to fruition as the pandemic has played out?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, SMUD's been renowned for programs and services, innovations in pricing, lots and lots of leadership awards we've gotten around the innovation that's occurred in the company. I think, I know we're driven by our purpose, and I'm going to look sideways to make sure I get it exactly right, but it basically says our purpose is to enhance the quality of life for our customer and community through creative energy solutions. So if you align behind that, excuse me, then you would think automatically you have innovation, but it's not quite that simple. So what I found, especially moving around in different jobs in SMUD, whether I was the chief customer officer in my role as chief energy delivery officer, people are in pockets in what they do. And sometimes if you don't set an expectation for innovation, it won't occur. And what we found is, especially dealing with the field forces, I mean, that area is ripe for innovation. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of processes. And if your angle is just throw technology at it, you're going to fail. So what we did was, first of all, bring everybody on the same page. It's your company. Don't you want to improve it? And then if you look at some of the ambitious goals that SMUD has now around clean air in the Sacramento region in 2030, around getting to net zero or absolute zero by 2030, you're going to have to put a lot of resources there. So it's really important to create capacity in the rest of the organization in order to be able to do that. So you can save tens of millions of dollars in these other processes, but it's not just the money. We focus on enhancing the customer experience. We can't keep jumping over fences to go inspect poles and scaring customers, for example. So that requires all of the customer information, all of the preference centers, all of that stuff. On the other side of the house, out in the field, I found a real common sense. If it's common sense to do it, instead of having stacks of paper in a little pickup truck and trying to stay in touch with customers and in touch with a dispatcher, and you automate all of that through different tools and you change processes, the staff don't need change management, believe it or not, because you save on that if you have a compelling story. So at our core, you have to put the right leaders in place and you have to get them aligned. You have to respect the fact that the employees actually do want to improve. So your sell on innovation is so much easier if you have where we want to land in mind. And I think that's been a big part of the success of SMUD and the innovation and creating that capacity for us to do a lot of the stuff that's extremely innovative on the program side, on the push for clean air, because we can't just do clean air. We have to have affordability, reliability, all of those base issues. And as you've seen in California, luckily so far not in our service territory, but we've gone a long way towards clean air in California. We ran into a resource adequacy issue just recently during the heat waves, and you all know about that, and that's been looked at and so on. So the need to now collaborate and innovate with partners and collectively is now being stressed and now being tested. So I think you can't be your own entity anymore because you exist in a much bigger ecosystem.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you for listening. I see you shaking your head over there. But I wanted to change the question up a little bit and really talk about the role of empathy and emotional intelligence. We've seen these quote unquote buzzwords, but there's a lot of value that they bring to organizations today. And I know you've done a lot of work in that. What role does this play in cultivating an innovative mindset?
Absolutely. So great, rich content on governance and collaboration. Those are definitely needed. And I will start by saying nothing is linear, right? There's no such thing as linear conversations or linear approaches. So everything that we're saying here is a multifaceted approach. And empathy and emotional intelligence is also part of that multifaceted approach. It's leadership, right? What is the change leadership, innovation leadership that each one of us should possess in terms to foster a safe environment for our employees to feel safe, to fail, to come back with a plan B, or let me took your feedback, here's a different iteration. So really emotional intelligence and empathy, how do they play a role in that is, I'll start with empathy, is really understanding, especially in these times. It is just more prevalent now, but please know empathy should always be a muscle that we should be building at all times, no, regardless of COVID, post or pre-COVID. But empathy really is recognizing where your employees are in the journey and meeting them there, so that then you can then make incremental leaps to improvement and enhancing their performance and their value contributions and feeling connected and valued. That's critical in empathy. The emotional intelligence part is, and I'll use the definition around Goldman. There's 4 domains, which is self-awareness, which we can be self-aware all day long, but if we don't do anything about it, what's the value, right? So there's also self-regulation. You're aware, self-regulation. Then there's social awareness, understanding the environment. I think Jeff and Frankie and Josh, you talked about being able to understand what's the environment and then be able to regulate based on those conditions. What is your contribution? What is your role? What is your most valuable role in that environment? Because you're going to have to be agile and pivot to make sure you optimize the value. So the good news is for everybody, these are muscles we can all build. And I will be talking, all these things that we're talking about are muscles. So our audience and ourselves here, look at where your muscle is. If we got to go to the gym and work these out, let's do that so that we make sure that we have a consistent way of leading through innovation, because the opposite of not being consistent is mistrust, because they don't know where you are in the process, and the people will be afraid to approach and to innovate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And want to turn a little bit to, and both of you have touched on this a little bit as well, and it might be somewhat of a loaded question to set the tone. So during these times, this energy industry is changing rapidly. In this, really, who should own the role of change management and innovation? And Josh, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I strongly believe it's got to start at the top. It's got to, in both actions and words matter. I would say actions actually matter more than words. But having that clear, consistent message from the top is really key. Of course, that's not enough. If we don't cascade that kind of down through the organization, and I think one interesting thing is the interplay between, we got these kind of top-down goals that everyone wants to achieve, and hopefully, CEO level to direct reports and on down, and leading that through, again, actions and words, really critical. But going back to Marisol and meeting folks where they are, you do need that empathy to turn it. Okay, what does that mean? What does that cost target mean for someone in the field, right? What does that mean to their daily job? Like that's a kind of abstract matter. We've got to make it really at a at a field force level. We've got to make it really tangible, and really kind of relatable. And I think that's also a important, but sometimes difficult part of that. The last thing I'd also touch on, in addition to this kind of, again, top down and paired with the bottoms up, is I really think transparency is so critical. Transparency to stakeholders, transparency to your own people. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. Communication, of course, is critical during these times when a lot of us are working remotely. But even transparency into process. How did we decide this as an organization, right? How did we roll this out? Transparency to the why. Like, why do we care about affordability? How does that relate to what our customers are dealing with? So I think, those are kind of the broad tools in the toolbox. It's still not a easy journey, even with the top down and the kind of making it relatable and the bottoms up and with transparency. But those are at least kind of building blocks that I think all of us need and all of us can build on if we start there.
If I can add, Jason, to that, I completely agree, Josh, and it builds trust. And then you have this autonomy, which equates to more productivity, right? Especially in this environment where we don't get to see the people. And so there's a lot of, just by default, having to trust that. The key is, though, now that we've been remote for some time, in some cases, it's become the norm. We need to be consistent still. We can't let off the gas pedal to step away and not be as engaged and connected and checking our employees, because then it'll impact trust. It'll impact connectedness. It'll impact productivity. So we have to be able to do all those things in terms of keeping the employees engaged, feeling valued, and understanding how they anchor to the big strategy.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Marty and Josh both said. I think that if you would have asked me this question, 4 years ago, I probably would have given a very different answer that I might have seen on an OCM slide somewhere. But the fact of the matter is, if I believe what Marty said about there is no such thing as linear anything anymore, and empathy as an approach is so critical. But what I would add is that I think if you're going to do it well, you have to believe that things like empathy are intrinsic to how you do work. It's no longer, I'm going to do this thing, and if I have time and money, I'm going to do change management. I'll do design thinking. I'll do, you name it, name the buzzword. You know, the way you work should be empathetic. So for example, if you, in the old days, if I were to think about creating an ambassador network, you know, as an OCM step that I check off, you know, right now, the way we do it is we include, you know, the mechanics in the workshops and the discussion. So just the fact of inclusion, participation, cooperation, collaboration creates a better ambassador network than any OCM strategy I've ever seen. So I think, you know, all those things are important, but I think it's important to figure out a way to just to make it an intrinsic part of how you conduct your daily work.
And I'll add, it's called exactly right. It's a competency. How do you make it a competency in your DNA from day to day? It's not the flavor of the month, or to your point, it's a task I'm going to check off. It's part of who you are and how you lead. So developing that leadership competency in everything that you do is the approach. And that, again, those are muscles that over time we can get better at, to your point.
And just one last thing to tack on. I know I'm sure Jason, you're dying to get a word in as well, but we're rolling out. But
Go.
the you know, with the change piece and the why, and you know, engaging our employees with empathy. I want to go back to the big why, because I think this is really important, and this has been really clarifying, at least here at Duquesne and other experiences we've had. The big why is almost always customers. So why do we want to engage our employees and with empathy and having them feel, you know, kind of skin in the game and really engage? Well, ultimately that's going to lead to a better customer experience. You know, when you call the call center, when you encounter, you know, someone from the utility, why do we need to be affordable? Because customers are hurting right now, right? We gotta manage our costs. Why do we need to innovate? Because customers expect more of us. And so I think almost always the change story ultimately starts and ends with the customer. And I think ultimately that can be very, very clarifying, because in my mind, we can draw any particular kind of activity, whether it's DER adoption all the way through, you know, making our product more affordable. And it all starts with the customer and all ends with the customer. And that is a very clarifying and ultimately simplifying and I think effective way to kind of look at and deal with change.
Thank you. So thank you, Josh. And Frankie, would like you to weigh in there and also kind of tackle this whole part of this agileness in this hybrid work model, along with the rapid change, EV, solar, all these things are happening, especially there in California. Where's the balance? What can we do to find balance? And then maybe touch a little bit on who owns that row. I know you did say it has to start at the top all the way down and make it a part of all the culture. Frankie might have frozen up there for a little bit there. So maybe Jeff, you want to, or Marty, chime in on the agility, being agile in remote work.
Well, yeah. I'll just say very quickly that I think our present situation has accelerated what a lot of people kind of saw coming anyway. And so, you know, the notion of being able to, you know, embrace the fact that you don't know, you know, everything, you can't spell everything out and have everything locked down and ready to go before you make a decision or make a move. I feel like our current situation just, you know, accentuates that. So I think whether it's on purpose or accidentally, I think a lot of, you know, organizations have discovered that they can be more adaptive, that they can, you know, incorporate notions of agility in how they conduct business and find new ways to do things and be successful at it. I just wish that, you know, that my hope is that this doesn't go away when you go back to whatever normal is, you know, that now we go back into our old habits. And we see that a lot with agility. People talk about, we're going to go do agile, whatever. And they all go to training, and, you know, within a week, they're all back in the same old habits, doing the same way they've done it for a long time. So I think this has accelerated some of that, you know, shift in mental model, and I hope it sticks.
I'm back,
yes,
Jason, by the way.
Yeah, Yeah, go ahead,
Uh,
Frankie. Thanks for
Just
listening.
to let everybody know that's watching out there, there's several AT&T trucks in our neighborhood, so they might be having an outage or something. So I'm having connectivity issues. I apologize for that. What I was starting to say was, if you went into COVID with an organization that wasn't fully engaged and there wasn't enough trust, you were probably going to struggle. We've put an enormous amount of time over the last 6.5 years, really creating alignment across our organization around, like, I have a fundamental thought about engagement. It's kind of comes down to happiness. And people say, well, you can't. I go on the assumption that an employee comes to work, all of us, including me, come to work happy. And if your minimum is that they can leave happy at the end of the day, you probably got a lot out of them in between that time. So if you want high engagement, you have to have high trust. So we've put a huge investment into aligning the leadership team because they create the experience for the employees. And I'm getting at this, that you can't get innovation, you can't get change unless you have that. So we've recognized, for example, that our frontline supervisors come from the field. And think about that. They've gone through an apprenticeship, they've become head of a crew, they're the person, they're it. And then they get sent to Mars, which is the office. And now they're the rookie. You have to recognize that. You have to put the things in place to show them how to be a lead. They're great leaders, but they have to adapt to a situation. You can't say, hey, open your laptops and log on through Citrix. What's that? And you suddenly make them feel like rookies again. So if you don't recognize that transition and make it quick and make it effective, you affect the employees, ultimately affecting the customers, ultimately not saving enough money, and hiring change management gurus to come and change people. All they wanted was better alignment. So we put an enormous amount of work into that. So in March, like many of you, when 1,600 of SMUD's 2,300 employees went home, we didn't miss a beat. Now, were there bumps? Yes, but we made a decision on the field side. I know there are other organizations did different things. They had probably different reasons. Some people went down to emergency services only. We did the opposite. We continued through with all of our development. Our development in the Sacramento area is exploding, even during COVID, in our downtown area and in the urban area and suburban areas. The amount of people doing improvements to their homes and needing panel upgrades is up 180% during this.
Wow.
Our work is way up. We've been able to catch up on some maintenance activities that were a little slower last year. So we're very, very proud of our organization. So that sounds like just base work. But while we're doing that, we're running a workforce optimization initiative with many, many user cases. We're doing it with our IT group with very little outside help, and it's highly effective. It's returning 25% reductions in unit costs on many items. The employees are much happier, like I said earlier, and the customer experience is improving. And the bottom line is improving, creating that capacity. So I really emphasize, it may be boring, but I emphasize like the real basics of leadership. If you have the wrong leader, think about yourself. Do you want to work for a leader that may be a great person, but doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't know how to align you, doesn't know how to communicate to you? You have to make things smaller. You're not one person out of 2,300. You're the company in and of yourself. The way you think and what you do, and if we trust you, you'll probably make great decisions on your own. And putting the right structure around people is so important as well. So that's been how we've created tens of millions of savings during this time. And we're quite confident. I don't want to make this all about daffodils and unicorns and everything was perfect. The thing that I've noticed around agility is, as we went into this and we started freezing hiring, we didn't reduce workforce at all, but we said we better get better. That presses you. I'm sorry, this is a long answer, but that presses you into looking, how can you use your organization? We have noticed, in my opinion, that we could be better at cross-functional needs, having much more adaptive workforce, much more agile. People should wear more than one hat. What's wrong with that? We have a lot of people that wear one hat, and then maybe their work goes down a little, we can't use them somewhere else. Think if you could take SMUD 2,300 and make it effectively 2,500 without adding a person. Then you have real agility. And I didn't say reduce, if you notice, because we have a lot more work to do. But to me, there are definitely opportunities been identified by COVID and how we're operating that we're taking very positively as change going forward to make us even more effective.
If I can add to that, Frankie, I love your story. I think it's fantastic. I think the other part of is challenging the status quo, right? When we have run the business for years and years and a day of, of the utility history of this is the way we've done run the business. And now we're up to challenging each other because now we're competing, right, for less resources, including money and people. So now we have to have those difficult decisions to what is the anchor, what are our strategic imperatives, and how do we invest our people right? In terms of skills and roles to achieve that. But you have to have an open mindset that you have to let go. Leaders have to let go and not feel that it's a power play. It's about the greater good of the organization. And that's what I think the silver linings about COVID, there's a lot of silver linings, including this, but also agility. I think people have realized, including myself, when I self-reflect, how agile and how resilient I really am that I ever thought I was. I mean, this really has stressed us, but to the point of realization that, wow, we can do this. This is fantastic. How do we sustain this agility and resiliency in this new environment and not revert back to status quo? So great story. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And want to let the audience know, please feel free to send in some questions here in the chat. We are moderating and would love if you have any questions for the panel here. So I'll jump into one of our last questions that if we're going to get there, we need to continuously bring new talent on, and the generations are changing, obviously, and they will change, and we know they're going to be different. But I would love some perspective, and maybe from each one of you, is when you're thinking about developing these future employees, the future workforce, either currently in there or recruiting them, should we be should we be rethinking that approach to tapping into their potential? And I've already heard some anecdotes of how to do that, but would love to start with Jeff to see what you guys are doing, and then Frankie from there.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Thanks, Josh. I think for us, there's three fundamental things. One is that Gen Z is the most ethnically and racially diverse generation in US history. So diversity and inclusion doesn't happen organically. So you better be on top of it. Second thing is probably that they're really the first true digital natives. That's the era that they grew up in. So that has to be part of your mental model and your mindset of how to engage, Generation Z. And probably a third thing I saw on monster.com is 75% of Generation Z rate purpose over paychecks. So I think that, kind of going back to the people aspect, there better be, a sense of, purpose, as you engage these folks. So that's what I would say.
Frankie?
Yeah. And for me, this is a great question. So I've always found, right, in our own careers, right, we were all different ages as well. And the one fundamental that is consistent with human beings is we make assumptions. We make assumptions about Gen Z. We make assumptions about people over 60 or people under 20 or people in their 40s. And we attribute our thoughts to them instead of actually listening and observing and adapting. So I've always found that weird. When I first joined SMUD, I remember there was a baby boomer kind of criticism of these new people have no loyalty. And I said, did you hire them for loyalty or did you hire them for the brains and hard work? So don't impose what was a value for you around loyalty on somebody who could be an even better employee. We have these employee resource groups, ERGs at SMUD. I'm sure other companies have similar. We have a young professional one, and I happen to be the executive sponsor of that one. And boy, talk about the most favorite part of my day. Well, it's not every day, but when I engage with them, I remember at a potluck around Thanksgiving, I sat down with them and I jokingly said, so what is wrong with all of you? And they all laughed. I said, why does everybody pick on your generation? And we had just the greatest conversation. And guess what? They're like normal human beings with different influences that you have to take advantage of. That's the whole point of this. It's just another form of diversity, like Jeff said. And you really, really have to value, listen. But I want to really emphasize, across your leadership, you have to have open conversations around not making assumptions about any group of people, but being very specific about this group, because the creativity is unbelievable that I've seen. If you give young people a place for that to happen, if you force them into a system that actually reduces that creativity, there's a gentleman passed away recently, Sir Ken Robinson. He did a very great TED talk around, and it's not picking on schools, but it's actually called How Schools Kill Creativity. It's about 19 minutes long. I'd recommend any leader or any person watch it. It's just getting out of the way so that people are creative. I think that's the basis of dealing with Gen Z or any generation for that matter. everybody needs to be on the same page in your culture. There can't be these pockets of, well, they're like this and they're like this. You all know that. It's easy to say, hard to do. But again, third time I'll triple down is you have to kill assumptions about people and get people to just be open-minded to work and speak to these young people. They're fantastic. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. Josh?
Yeah, so just two things I'd point out. One is transparency. We talked about it a little bit before, but I see a growing and to me healthy expectation of increased transparency in the workplace amongst employees. And again, we shouldn't assume certain demographics always have those characteristics, but I see those assumptions only increasing, and I think that's a very healthy thing. The other kind of piece that I find really exciting is if you think of like digital natives, we're very comfortable with the idea of crowds. We have like social media is kind of like an online digital crowd, and we've created these kind of these sort of crowd platforms. They all have a dark side, as we know, but I'm really excited about the ability to leverage the crowd to solve really big problems. And I think slowly over time, our companies are becoming more comfortable with the notion that A, you don't have the best ideas. B, let's be honest, you might not have actually all the best people working in your organization. And so therefore, we need to get much more comfortable about leveraging what's out there in the world and various forms of quote unquote the crowd to help us solve those problems. And that's something I think that that sort of new demographics of the workplace can be more comfortable and familiar with, just given the sort of digital native aspect of that. And I'm really optimistic for how we can use and leverage crowds to really solve some of the big problems we have.
Okay, and then Marty, and then we'll get to a few questions that come in.
So thank you. Great dialogue on generations. I will tell you, I'm also of the mindset very similar to Frankie and Jeff on the individual themselves. Where are they? What are their preferences? Yes, there are tendencies, to Jeff's point, in terms of what environment they grew up in that have some importance in it. But it all starts foundationally with the mindset. If we want to unleash potential, we as managers of people have to foster that environment, but also how do you have this growth mindset? And I will refer to the book Mindset from Dr. Dweck, which I happen to have here, of having that growth mindset. But how do we help others, including myself? When I read the book, I wish I would have read this a long time ago, give it to my mentors, because what it did for me is I mastered how to learn. I have a growth mindset saying anything is possible for me. Well, before I had these barriers in my mind. And so how do we foundationally prepare our generations, our employees, no matter where they are in their journey and their career, to have that growth mindset and master how to learn? And that's innovation. That's creating new ways of doing things and new ways of doing work. So really starting with mindset is really critical in the success of change and innovation and bridging the old with the new.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Marty. And so we'll get to a few questions. And Jeff, I got the signal that a special guest can make an appearance if he's available, he or she. Frankie, love you, Frankie. That's man. That's a literal comment we have here. Let's see, Marty, can you repeat the title of that book just real quick? I got a question.
Absolutely. So it's Mindset, The New Psychology of Success by Dr. Carol S. Dweck. All
right. Here's a question we hear a lot, and see who wants to take it as: how do we get away from that we've always done it this way mentality? Hear that a lot. Who'd like to take a stab at that?
I will. Yeah, I don't know. I hear people say that more than I actually hear it happen.
Okay.
So I don't run into it as much. And I guess being in senior management at SMUD, you don't always hear the bad stuff, right? You have to get out there and hear that that's a barrier for newer employees. So I think it's nearly like an underground, right? Where a newer employee will tell you, I had an idea and they won't let me do it. So I think you have to really, I hate to be boring here, but you have to get back to, like, I have forums. My direct reports are directors, but then we have managers, and then we have supervisors, and then we have leads out in the field. I meet with all of those to create alignment as groups. I don't meet just to listen to their problems. I meet to create alignment down through and to set the expectations around what our mission is. And that tends to, do we still run into? you know, we're not going to do it a different way. Yes, we hear that through our own surveys and so on. I think it's going away. And I think things like crises we have around whether they're heat waves and resource adequacy, wildfires, COVID, they get the creative juices going. They also create fear, unfortunately, for people.
Mhm.
And then our customers are hurting. So with so many compelling issues, it's driving change and accelerating change faster. So you can take advantage of these things in a weird way, right? To really call people to action. But I don't know, to me, you have to speak about that cannot happen. Ideas are okay. Now, not every idea is a great idea, right? But you have to have a culture that people will actually bring them forward. And I think SMUD has that. Do we have pockets that employees still say that happens? Yes. But I think as you put the right leaders in place and kind of course correct the ones that are, remember, it's the leader that's tolerating that behavior within their area. So they're in control of that experience that I said much earlier on, that employee experience. So you have to address it rather than just let it linger, I guess. So sorry for the kind of common sense basic answer, but I really believe that.
Just one thing to add briefly to that. We talked about assumptions. So the assumptions, we've always done it that way. I've typically found when we run across that, that reflects actually just a lack of knowledge or insight into other ways that something is done. So typically I've found that statement is not, this is the best, the subtext is not, this is the best possible way it could ever be done. The subtext tends to be, I'm not aware of a better way to do this. And typically I found if you can demonstrate through examples or through learning or teaching a better way to do it, then folks tend to come around. But I find that statement is more born of just kind of lack of knowledge of a better way to do it versus a true resistance to change.
If I can pull that thread just with one comment, it's also asking, what problem are we solving, right? I think reframing the conversation versus this is always, what problem are we solving? And then working backwards to what are potential solutions. Just changing the way we think can help change that mindset as well.
Thank you. So here's another one that's really interesting, talking about using innovation in the energy space to create wealth, whether it's industrial, commercial, and industrial. The example they give here is the value of real estate because of property's ability to have solar or distributed energy in there. Any thoughts there, Josh or Frankie? I know you guys do a lot of work in both those areas.
I have heard of some startups, in adjacent spaces. So kind of like what they call Fintech, financial technology spaces, that are looking at creating financial products that are associated with DER, with solar, things like that. So one could, invest their capital in a bank or an IRA that's tied to those kind of long-lived capital assets that have a kind of green angle to them. So I think that's something that's interesting. We haven't yet directly looked into that here at Duquesne Light. It's sort of a little bit of adjacent to our current business model. But I think it's pretty interesting. And also, by the way, it's a good hedge against all the risk associated with climate change, moving your money outside of that. So.
Yeah, I think I would add, Jason, and I apologize if you hear somebody next door cutting a tree down in my backyard here, but it just started. Hopefully you can't hear it. For me, when you look at as a utility and us enhancing the quality of life in our community and for our customers, so if you then go to affordability and trying to keep rates low in an era where your revenue is going down, but there's an enormous opportunity in electric vehicles and electrification. So it's kind of coincidental that you're in Austin, Jason, because I used to be in the semiconductor industry, and Semitech was created in Austin, all as an R&D center for the equipment manufacturers in the semiconductor industry. And you had an enormous boom in Austin because they all came there. You had the Applied Materials, all of those companies I used to deal with centered around there. SMUD is now innovating in the space around the California Mobility Center. The concept being have that in Sacramento, attract R&D, attract the satellite companies that come around that, even have auto manufacturers possibly doing their R&D there. and bringing these energy solutions and EVs to all parts of the community. Don't leave anybody behind. We get the kilowatt growth, the community grows, jobs increase. So that's the concept we have of how can you leverage the utility and the brains within the utility to actually enhance the quality of life in the community, but also make our business even more stable going forward in an era where you've had flatter down revenues for quite a few years. We didn't even, during these heat waves, we didn't even come close to hitting the peak we hit in 2006, back in 2006. So there's a compelling reason why you need to do this as well, but it's also great for the community. That's how SMUD is leveraging, not necessarily we have to succeed, but the whole community has to succeed.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We're about, and Marty, we're about at our time here. And we did have, I do want to touch on one question because I did say I have an extra 2 minutes here. So if we can get a quick answer, this is interesting. What skills would you recommend developing for individuals who want to get into the utility industry? So folks, if you had to pick one or two.
Yeah, I don't mind starting. Just, I would just say call to action on, go to the leadership gym and work out your muscles on empathy and emotional intelligence and fostering innovation and building all these great qualities of a leader. There are so many things that leadership is. It's just that those competencies and leading with the right intentions of anchoring to the strategy, anchoring to our customer, and being thoughtful and mindful of where people are in the journey. So there's not just one. I think it's a litmus of a whole series of skills that I recommend. But there's a call to action there that everybody work out at the leadership gym.
Jeff, you want to give the final thought there?
I completely agree. I think in an age where technology is becoming ubiquitous, the tech space certainly is interesting, but I also think that, I think utilities need a much kind of broader set of kind of experiences and backgrounds. So to Marty's point, go to the leadership, route, and try to be as broad as you can across a multidisciplinary track.
Okay. Well, that wraps it up. I want to thank a great panel. I think we sparked a discussion. I think each segment in its own could have been its own conference because this is so important. But as you guys talk about the journey to that moonshot of a clean energy future, I think putting people at the center of that and how we create those cultures of innovation, how we harness it, we believe it's key. And I think everyone on here providing your guidance on how we get there. And now I'll turn on my MC hat for a second. So just imaginary virtual hat. And I'll take this time to introduce the next panel, which is a fireside chat. It's going to be happening at 12:30. And it's evolving into the utility of the future using infrastructure, data, and analytics to better serve customers. Please join us at 12:30. Take some time off. It's going to be Don Rees, the Senior Vice President of Outcomes for Itron. Abhay Gupta, he's a co-founder and CEO of Bijli. And he'll be moderating that will be Chris Moyer, Senior Director of Content Research from Zpryme. Please take a few minutes to take a break and then come join us at 12:30. Panel, once again, thank you. You guys have a great day and we'll be talking to everyone soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.